Do you know that long before Ya Asantewa, there was another fierce female leader who stood up against European colonial forces? Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba fought and resisted the Portuguese for 39 years, striving to prevent the enslavement of her people. Her name alone struck fear into the hearts of the Portuguese, who knew her as the woman who fought like a lion. Welcome to Black Stories Untold, where we delve into the powerful histories that the Europeans often tried to bury. In today's episode, we'll explore the incredible story of Queen Nzinga, a warrior queen whose leadership and bravery became a symbol of resistance against colonial oppression. Her strategic genius and unwavering determination made her one of the most formidable figures in African history. So, stay tuned as we uncover the untold chapters of her legacy and the extraordinary battles she waged to protect her people from the horrors of slavery. This is a history lesson you won't find in traditional textbooks, but it's one you need to know. Let's dive into the story of Queen Nzinga, the woman who challenged an empire. Greatness emerged from the brutal treatment of Africans, growing strong despite the cruelty they faced. It's hard to understand why the Portuguese were so harsh, beating enslaved Africans who were already chained and defenseless. Even from a practical standpoint, it didn't make sense, as these people were valuable commodities for trade. Over half of them died before reaching their destinations. Common sense should have prevented the slavers from being so cruel, but it didn't. This led Queen Nzinga to call the whites the true savages in Africa, as they created the harsh conditions she rose against. The Portuguese strategy involved dividing African tribes and encouraging them to fight among themselves. After 1608, Bento Cardoso, the commander of the Portuguese army, intensified this strategy. His plan was to depopulate Angola by demanding a large number of slaves from every chief, who had to supply slaves directly to the Portuguese. This bypassed the king of Ndongo, to whom the chiefs traditionally paid taxes in slaves. The increased demand for slaves led to more warfare between tribes, as chiefs raided each other's lands to meet their quotas. Chiefs who failed to provide the required number of slaves were enslaved themselves. In 1 year, over 100 chiefs and other leaders were sold into slavery or killed by the Portuguese. The actual numbers were likely higher, as casualty figures were often underreported. This created widespread confusion and fear among the people, worsened by the Jaga, a group known for looting and violence who allied with Cardoso. The Angolan king, who had been working with the slave traders, found himself in trouble. He was losing both his people and his profits. Realizing the situation was getting worse, he began to resist the Portuguese. The people, even though they knew their king was also involved in the slave trade, desperately supported the resistance. Their efforts paid off. The Portuguese and their allies, the Jaga, were stopped, and the war continued for years. After Cabaça, the capital city, was taken by the Portuguese, they faced heavy losses. The new governor, sent from Lisbon to finally conquer Angola, was forced to seek peace without achieving victory. The Portuguese claimed their defeat was due to widespread illness, but the Africans saw this as an excuse and rejected their peace proposals, continuing the war amidst famine and chaos. In 1619, a new Portuguese commander killed over 100 chiefs, prompting the Pope to step in and call for peace. In 1622, a new governor was sent to make peace, as Portugal had been appointing governors for over 40 years without fully controlling Angola. The peace talks took place in Luanda, led by Nzinga, the sister of the king. Even before the talks began, the Portuguese governor insulted Nzinga by only providing chairs for himself and his councillors, forcing her to stand. However, Nzinga's attendants quickly rolled out a royal carpet, and one of them formed a human throne for her to sit on. Nzinga's people admired her so much that they willingly supported her in this way. Nzinga faced the Portuguese governor as a leader, not as a subject. She refused to recognize him as the governor or acknowledge a Portuguese colony in Angola. She demanded that the Portuguese leave Cabaça, stop their alliance with the Jaga, and allow chiefs who had become vassals to return to their former status. She also agreed to release Portuguese prisoners. Although a treaty was signed in 1622, it soon fell apart when the governor invaded Congo again. When Nzinga's brother died in 1623, she became the Queen of Ndongo. The Portuguese spread rumors that she had poisoned him, a story repeated by historians for centuries without evidence. Nzinga, now queen, quickly demanded that the Portuguese honor the treaty, threatening war if they didn't. As the Portuguese prepared for conflict, the Dutch arrived, seeking to challenge the Portuguese's control over the slave trade and mineral wealth for West and Central Africa. The Dutch allied with King Pedro II of Congo, capturing Portuguese slave ships and causing trouble. This situation gave Queen Nzinga more time to prepare. She even formed an alliance with the Jaga, promising to marry their chief Kasanji and adopting some of their customs. Despite knowing they were unreliable, this strategic move demonstrated Nzinga's leadership and determination to protect her people and resist foreign domination. Nzinga's most remarkable action, and one that cements her legacy as one of the greatest women in history, occurred in 1624. She declared all the territory under her control in Angola as free land, proclaiming that any slaves who reached it from any direction would be forever free. She recognized that white colonial power in Africa relied heavily on using black soldiers to suppress other black people. To counter this, she initiated a bold and unprecedented plan to undermine the Portuguese's use of black troops. Nzinga's soldiers infiltrated the Portuguese ranks, pretending to join their forces, but actually working to destabilize them from within. Her agents' quiet but effective efforts led to entire companies rebelling and deserting to her cause, bringing with them valuable weapons and ammunition. As her army grew, bolstered by runaway slaves seeking refuge in the only safe haven in Africa, Nzinga's influence expanded. She successfully convinced many vassal chiefs to rebel against the Portuguese and support her cause, uniting against the common enemy. This defiance was intolerable to the Portuguese, who realized that Nzinga's actions were a significant threat to their control. The Portuguese, based in their stronghold in Luanda, issued an ultimatum to Nzinga, demanding the immediate return of all chiefs, soldiers, and slaves to Portuguese territory. They threatened war if she refused. However, a state of war already existed due to Nzinga's previous ultimatum. Despite their fear of her growing power, the Portuguese hesitated to attack, partly using the Dutch threat as an excuse for delay. They attempted to undermine Nzinga's authority by declaring her not the legitimate queen and installing a puppet king, Idi Kiluanji, whom they renamed King Philip I of Ndongo. The Portuguese mobilized all their forces, including special river fleets, to crush Nzinga before the Dutch could intervene again. However, Nzinga took the initiative and attacked first, targeting the puppet king and his forces. In July 1626, the Portuguese managed to capture Nzinga's primary stronghold on an island in the Kwanza River. This strategic loss forced Nzinga to retreat and temporarily leave Angola. The Portuguese celebrated, believing they had quashed the black resistance and that their control was now secure with King Philip I in place. Despite her temporary absence, The loyalty of Nzinga's supporters remained unshaken. The people of Ndongo did not recognize the new king, seeing him as an outsider with a Portuguese name and not a true African ruler. Nzinga had previously dropped the name Anne, given to her at baptism, rejecting the idea that converting to Christianity meant submitting to European control. Oral tradition held that the people believed Nzinga was merely away on business and would soon return. Meanwhile, coded drum messages indicated that Nzinga was actively organizing guerrilla attacks across the land. These messages reassured her followers that she was still leading the resistance and preparing to return with a new army of liberation. The people of Ndongo, filled with hope and unwavering faith in their queen, were ready to stand by and support her as she continued to challenge the Portuguese occupation. The written and oral histories align in recounting Queen Nzinga's remarkable return to power. In November 1627, she re-entered her country at the head of a formidable army. As she advanced, her forces grew stronger, with loyal chiefs and enthusiastic supporters, including her devoted freed people, joining her. Nzinga's triumphant return and subsequent capture of the Kwanza stronghold, forcing Philip I to flee, stunned the Portuguese. They were astounded by the display of black unity and strength, especially under a woman's leadership. This unity, now seen as a manifestation of black power, posed a significant threat to the Portuguese, who were determined to break it. The Portuguese retreated to their coastal strongholds, citing the Dutch threat as a reason, though it was Nzinga's forces that posed the real danger. With no immediate Dutch threat, the Portuguese regrouped and resolved to launch an all-out campaign to capture or kill Nzinga. They offered rewards including land and freedom to anyone who could capture her. Realizing the potential loss of life among her people if she were captured, Nzinga once again outwitted her enemies. She spread a false story that she had left the country and been killed after entering enemy territory. This ruse led to widespread mourning in Ndongo, convincing even the Portuguese of her death. The bishop celebrated her demise with a special mass, believing that the obstacle to Portuguese control was finally removed. However, in 1629, Nzinga shocked everyone by reappearing with renewed strength, leading her forces and fierce Jaga allies to decisive victories. She not only regained control of her own country, but also became the Queen of Matamba, replacing its weaker ruler. Now an Empress of Two Realms, Nzinga intensified her efforts against slavery and the slave trade. She made both Ndongo and Matamba sanctuaries for escaped slaves, striking fear into neighboring chiefs involved in the slave trade. Recognizing the growing threat Nzinga posed, the Portuguese saw the handwriting on the wall. In a desperate attempt to salvage their position, Lisbon recalled the unfulfilled treaty with Nzinga from 1622 and declared that their wars against her had been unjust. In 1639, they sent high-level envoys to seek a settlement. Nzinga, ever the astute leader, listened to their pledges of friendship, but remained focused on her goal of reorganizing her kingdoms and undermining colonial rule. To her, every white man in Africa was an enemy of the black people, and there was no compromise on this conviction. Even the religious garments worn by priests in Angola often hid their true purpose, serving as agents of the empire and indulging their desires for enslaved African women. Nzinga, having seen the reality of black-white relations, distrusted all whites and their deceptive treaties. By 1641, the Dutch had weakened Portugal's hold along the African coast, and Nzinga's firm stance made it increasingly difficult for the Portuguese to maintain control. The governor and council, desperate, declared another full-scale war against her. However, the situation favored the Angolans. The Congo Kingdom to the north, under King Garcia II, became more active in its war against the Portuguese, aligning with Dutch interests when beneficial. Moreover, the Dutch invasion of Portuguese territories began in 1641 before any moves could be made against Congo and Ndongo, Nzinga's domain. Nzinga continued her campaign, achieving victories wherever battles occurred. With Dutch support, the significant Portuguese stronghold of Masangano fell in 1648. However, as Dutch reinforcements from Brazil arrived, the Dutch withdrew, leaving their African allies to face the Portuguese alone. The resulting battle was brutal, with the Portuguese massacring many African fighters. Following these events, the new Portuguese governor, Salvador de Sá, attempted to negotiate peace with Congo and Nzinga. The Congolese king did not respond directly, but sent a monk to hear the terms, while Nzinga agreed to discuss peace. De Sá reported to the Portuguese king that the African states were subdued, although resistance continued even in Portuguese-held territories. Despite repeated failed attempts, the Portuguese knew they could not conquer both Congo and Ndongo Matamba. They resorted to diplomatic deception, offering treaties with ambiguous language that could be interpreted in various ways, favoring the Portuguese. Nzinga, however, saw through these deceptions, understanding that the treaties would make her a vassal of the Portuguese king, subject to paying a substantial annual tribute. She refused to surrender her people to perpetual bondage, knowing the Portuguese could not recognize her greatness because she was a black woman. Nzinga delayed signing any treaty for 6 years, using the time to allow her war-torn land and exhausted people to recover. She sought peace, not to avoid war, but to prevent further bloodshed and maintain her country's independence. By 1656, tired from decades of conflict, she agreed to a revised treaty, making some concessions, including allowing the puppet King Adi to govern certain territories under Portuguese control. In her remaining years, Nzinga focused on rebuilding her nation, resettling former slaves, and developing an economy independent of the slave trade. She was acutely aware that without strong successors, her efforts might ultimately fail, leaving her people vulnerable to Portuguese dominance. In 1663, as Nzinga passed away, her people mourned deeply, wondering if another leader like her or Garcia would rise to protect them. Over 3 centuries later, Angolans continued to struggle against Portuguese control, still yearning for a leader as formidable as Nzinga. In her final moments, 2 priests were allowed to administer the last rites. Despite her earlier renunciation of Catholicism and banning missions from her country, the Portuguese narrative suggested she returned to the church before her death. This claim, recorded in Portuguese documents, was likely an attempt to portray Nzinga as finally submitting to their religion. However, the Angolan people, now largely Catholic, did not believe she ever truly returned to the church. They remembered her as one of the first to see the connection between Portuguese conquests, the slave trade, and the church as an unholy trinity against which she had fought tirelessly. She never surrendered, and her legacy as a fierce defender of her people remained strong in their hearts. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba is remembered as a powerful and strategic leader who fiercely resisted Portuguese colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Through her intelligence, diplomacy, and military prowess, she defended her people's sovereignty and provided a haven for those fleeing slavery. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, Nzinga's legacy as a symbol of resistance and freedom endures, inspiring generations in Angola and beyond. Her story, highlights the resilience and determination of those who fought against oppression and injustice. In conclusion, before the Europeans could conquer Africans or black people in general, they often relied on dividing and manipulating us to fight against each other. This tactic was crucial to their success, and it's a method they haven't abandoned. Today, they continue to use similar strategies to undermine African unity and progress. It's crucial that we stay wise and vigilant, avoiding external threats and forces that seek to divide us. If you enjoyed this story, let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment to help spread these important historical lessons. Thank you for watching Black Stories Untold. Stay tuned for more inspiring and eye-opening stories from our rich and powerful history.